Lynn is being attacked by a man, I shouted loudly in front of the gathered relatives. Naturally, the relatives looked at each other, wondering what was going on. What do you mean she's being attacked? Lynn's mother asked, worried, as she rushed over. Just come with me, you'll understand when you see it, I said, pretending to be in a panic as I led the relatives to the dressing room. When we heard the sounds of a man and woman breathing heavily from inside the room, everyone was shocked. What on earth is this? Lynn's father exclaimed in a disturbed voice. I didn't want to believe that this was happening either. Actually, I finally decided to reveal to everyone about Tom and Lynn. Everyone's faces froze as they heard my words. I clenched my fist and inserted the key into the dressing room's lock. My name is Kelly Turner. I'm 56 years old and work in a real estate company. I married Tom 30 years ago, and we had our son Ken 2 years later. Ken is 28 this year. Recently, Ken introduced us to Lynn, his classmate and fiancée. Lynn was as beautiful as a TV reporter, with a face that any man would find attractive. She was a well-mannered young lady, and I thought she was the perfect match for Ken. Tom seemed to feel the same way and quickly became friendly with Lynn, chatting and laughing with her. Ken and I have been together since college, Lynn said, leaning towards Ken and looking very happy. Their bond seemed very deep. I was overjoyed at my son Ken marrying a girl like Lynn. I thought that Tom must have felt the same way. We were smiling the whole time as he watched the affectionate couple. Tom and I had an arranged marriage, but I believed I had been in love with him just as Ken and Lynn were. Now, as a family, that love had turned into deep affection, but Tom was still very important to me. Watching Ken and Lynn together, I reaffirmed my feelings for Tom. But at that moment, I had no idea of the fate that awaited me. Our family, which should have been enveloped in happiness with Ken's marriage, was slowly starting to fall apart. I first sensed something was off during the New Year's following the next year. Ken and Lynn had officially married and visited our house for the first time as a married couple. Thanks for coming all this way. No problem, I was looking forward to seeing you and Dad, Lynn replied with a smile, despite what must be the hassle of visiting her in-laws. Feel free to make yourself at home, as if it were your own house. Tom, too, seemed to like Lynn's attitude and took extra care to show her around the house and teach her how to use the appliances. Dad seems happy. Yes, he is. We only have one son, so I think he's thrilled to have a daughter now. In fact, I was also happy to have a daughter like Lynn, having never raised a girl myself. Tom already seemed to think of Lynn as his daughter, and he was more excited than usual. That evening, while we were all around the dinner table, a tipsy Tom said, Lynn, how about you move in and stay with us? His nose and ears were bright red as he looked at Lynn with a passionate gaze. I thought it was too much to suggest living together and glanced at Lynn to see her reaction. If my in-laws had suggested such a thing in front of everyone, it would be hard to refuse. Tom, you're too drunk, I interjected, trying to help. It's fine. Right, Lynn? I nervously looked at Lynn's face. Surprisingly, she didn't seem uncomfortable and smiled as if she wasn't opposed to the idea. Yes, I would love to. Right? It makes sense, doesn't it, Ken? It would save on rent, and it's a win-win if Lynn comes to live with us, Tom said, his face growing redder with happiness that Lynn agreed so readily to move in. Lynn probably just nodded in politeness to Tom's suggestion. But Tom, taking it seriously, must feel very fortunate. Enough, you're embarrassing. I'm sorry, Lynn. Just forget about what he said, I said. No, I don't mind at all. In fact, I'd really like to move in. I was surprised. She probably did not mean what she said, but was probably thinking of Tom's feelings, but I feel that she is a capable woman in the way she brushed off his reckless recommendation without any sign of agitation. The dinner continued pleasantly. Tom was doting on Lynn more than his own son Ken, laughing and drinking together. It's great that she get along with Dad. Yeah, I think so. But I think Dad's a bit too drunk. Watching the two, Ken and I felt a sense of warmth. It was about a week after the New Year's break that Tom seriously started talking about living together with our eldest son. Just like I said the other day, Lynn and Ken are gonna start living with us next month. I'm counting on you to get the beddings ready. What? What do you mean? I asked, surprised, looking at Tom twice. I mean living together. Didn't we talk about it a lot? Forgot because you were drunk? I remember, but you were serious? Of course. Tom nodded as if it was the most natural thing. I was surprised because I had thought the living together talk was just a joke limited to that moment. Did you really discuss this with Ken? And did Lynn truly agree to live together? I bombarded Tom with questions, and he sighed in apparent exasperation before answering. Of course, I've been in touch. Lynn herself said she really wanted to live with us. Well, that's unusual. It's rare for someone to voluntarily want to live with their in-laws. Lynn's parents live in another state, so it's true that our place is closer, but why would she want to live with us? I was opposed to the idea of living together. Not that I didn't like the idea of living with Lynn. But having seen friends troubled by living with in-laws, I had decided never to live together if Ken got married. Despite my views, Tom insisted on living together, saying it was Lynn's wish. Before we knew it, the living together plan progressed rapidly, and the next month, Ken and Lynn moved in. Please take good care of us, Mom and Dad. Both Tom and I welcomed her warmly. Tom, in particular, seemed really happy, and I watched him joyfully like a child, along with Ken. Living with Ken and Lynn went smoother than I had expected. In fact, it was almost scary how well Lynn and Tom got along. Lynn seemed to like our home and, although a homemaker, she appeared lively and happy every day. She took care of most of the housework, which made things easier for me. Our days were lively and fun, but then Tom started feeling unwell and began missing work frequently. Are you okay, Tom? You've been looking unwell lately. I don't think it's anything serious, but it's a bit hard to go to work. I'll take another day off. All right, make sure you go to the doctor if it gets worse. I know. Tom buried himself deeper into the bed as he saw my concern. Leave Dad to me. If anything happens, I'll take him to the hospital right away. I'm glad I'm a homemaker, Lynn said, which reassured me somewhat. Indeed, with Lynn living with us, I could leave Tom's care to her with peace of mind. I left for work feeling relieved. When I returned home from work, Tom looked better and more energetic than in the morning. How are you feeling now? Much better, thanks to Lynn taking care of me. Tom's face looked somewhat happy and I had my doubts. Dad was sweating a lot, so I helped him change clothes. I also wiped his body down and cleaned him up. Oh, you did all that? Yes, he's my dear father-in-law, after all. I had thought nursing Tom meant just checking on him or maybe making some porridge. Lynn's level of care was more than I had expected. However, Lynn had even helped Tom change his clothes and wiped his body. Thank you, Lynn. I feel much better now. I'm glad. Lynn replied, her voice seemingly lively. I noticed Tom was grinning a bit too much. And, though I had my suspicions, I thought it was good that they were getting along and didn't say anything at that time. After that, Tom began frequently missing work, claiming to be unwell, and each time, Lynn took care of him. Every time I came home from work, I couldn't shake the feeling that the atmosphere between them crossed the line of father-in-law and daughter-in-law. I even started to doubt whether Tom's illness was real. The two of them, could they possibly be? I didn't want to think about it, but once the thought entered my mind, I couldn't rest until I knew the truth. So, one day, when Ken was on a business trip, I lied about also having to leave for a business trip on the same day. Lynn, I'm sorry to ask, but could you take care of the house for me? Of course, leave it to me, Lynn replied eagerly. With Lynn looking so enthusiastic, I left home as planned for the weekend. I killed time by shopping in the downtown area and eating at a restaurant I had been curious about. Eventually, I ended up in a cafe, waiting for time to pass. The time seemed to drag on forever. Finally, around 10 p.m., I left the cafe and headed straight home. Tom and Lynn thought I wouldn't be returning that night. Probably enjoying their time alone. With my heart pounding, I quietly opened the front door and entered. The living room light was on, but they weren't there. I guessed they might be in Tom's room, and sure enough, I could hear their voices coming from there. I took out my phone and turned on the voice recorder. We've managed to live together so easily. My fake illness doesn't seem to be suspected at all. Ken and Kelly are so naive. Really, should you be saying that? You were thinking the same thing. You noticed? Really, those people are so naive. There's no way I'd live with my in-laws without any benefit for myself. If it means being with you, Tom, such an act is a small price to pay. Lynn. Their conversation sounded like they were in a heated embrace, and I felt my face turn red with anger. Tom and Lynn had been having an affair behind Ken's and my back. When Tom suggested living together, he and Lynn had already developed feelings for each other. I wondered how long they had been involved. Right after Ken introduced you to me, I knew you were the one I wanted. Our physical compatibility is also incredible. Oh, stop it, that's embarrassing. Lynn replied in a sweet voice, and I felt nauseous just imagining her smiling happily. Lynn having an affair with Tom, who was about the same age as her own parents, was unbelievable to me. More importantly, how's our plan going? Can we execute it smoothly? Yeah, about Ken? Don't worry, I've got it under control. I've arranged the car, and I'll get Kelly out of the house too. Yay! You really are a dependable and great man, Tom. I really like you. Lynn, me too. I was intrigued that they were discussing some sort of plan. It seemed to involve Ken, but the details weren't clear, and I couldn't understand the critical aspects of their conversation. They mentioned something about arranging a car, but what did that mean? However, the mention of getting me out of the house was something I couldn't ignore. Hearing them whispering sweet nothings to each other made me feel utterly disgusted. I was about to record a bit more as evidence of their affair when… Hey, do you feel like someone's here? A presence? Oh, you might be right. They seemed to have sensed my presence and started moving towards the door. Realizing this, I hurried out of the room, put on my shoes, and left through the front door. If they discovered I was back, they might delete the recording of their conversation. I barely escaped from their vicinity. That night, I went straight to a hotel to stay overnight. The thought that they were cheating and yet planning to kick me out of the house was unbelievable. I'd make sure they regretted this. Clutching my phone, I fell asleep in the hotel bed, determined to reveal Tom and Lynn's affair to Ken. I didn't want to hurt Ken, who was innocent, but now that I knew about the affair, I couldn't stay silent. However, as I waited for Ken to return from his business trip, he didn't come back even after the week had begun. Ken was in a car accident. I was shocked by the call from the hospital. Ken had been hit by a car on his way back from the business trip. Moreover, the driver had fled the scene. I rushed to the hospital, but by the time I arrived, Ken had already passed away. How could this happen? I stumbled and fell in shock. All I knew about the hit and run was that the driver was a man. The criminal is still out there, not attempting to atone for their crime, and shamelessly on the run. The words Tom and Lynn had exchanged kept echoing in my mind. They had been talking about some plan involving Ken. I've arranged the car, Tom had said, and Lynn had praised him for being reliable. There was no doubt in my mind. Tom was the one who had committed the hit and run. It was Tom and Lynn's scheme. I felt a seething rage bubbling up from the pit of my stomach. I would never forgive them. To think they would take my son's life and get away with it. Ken's funeral was swiftly arranged. The entire family was visibly shaken by the sudden loss of Ken, who had been so young and dignified. Among the gathered relatives were, of course, Lynn's parents. They had no idea that their daughter was conspiring with her father-in-law, Tom, to assassinate Ken. I was calmly waiting for the right moment to expose Tom and Lynn. About an hour before the funeral was to start. Everyone was sitting in the chapel, lost in thoughts of Ken, when I remembered that I had left my wallet in the waiting room. Needing to keep my valuables with me, I decided to go back to get it. I had the key to the room, so I quickly unlocked the door and stepped inside. To my shock, I heard the voices of a man and a woman coming from behind a partition. Lynn. Tom, not here, it's not right. It's fine. I locked the door earlier, and everyone's at the funeral home. They all think Ken died in a tragic accident. Little do they know it was me. Oh, Tom. But because of that, we can be together now. Thank you, I love you. I couldn't believe the sweet, breathy words echoing in my ears. Tom, unaware that I had the key, was entangled with Lynn. Their disrespect at the time of Ken's death was beyond indecent. It was clear they were responsible for it. I found myself stealthily moving closer to the partition, and managed to sneakily capture the scene with my phone's camera. On the screen were Tom and Lynn, naked and embraced. They were so engrossed in each other that they didn't notice my phone. I continued to record them. Oh. Lynn, I love you. Let's get married right after this funeral. I'll divorce Kelly. Yes, I want to be with you, Tom. As they continued their selfish plans, I captured everything, filled with rage. Once I had enough footage, I quietly left the room and locked it from the outside. I then headed to the funeral home and raised my voice in front of the relatives. Please listen. Lynn is being attacked by a man, I exclaimed loudly. The relatives looked at each other in confusion and concern. What do you mean she's being attacked? Lynn's mother rushed over, looking worried. Please, just come with me. You'll understand when you see it. Pretending to be panicked, I led the relatives to the waiting room. The sounds of a man and a woman's breath from inside the room shocked everyone. What on earth is this? Lynn's father exclaimed, his voice filled with turmoil. I couldn't believe this was happening. Actually, I finally decided to reveal everything about Tom and Lynn to everyone. The faces of everyone who heard my words froze. I clenched my fist and inserted the key into the waiting room's lock. With a forceful push, I opened the door, and the voices of a man and a woman inside abruptly stopped. What the? Tom's voice came in surprise. Of course. He was shocked. He and Lynn were in the midst of an intimate encounter. They must have thought the room was locked and that no one could enter. I reaffirmed to myself what fools they were for doing such things here, unaware that I had the key. I entered the room with the relatives, and we all peered around the partition where Tom and Lynn were. What are you two doing here, I wonder? The two of them were scrambling to get dressed and were only half clothed when I peeked in. Their faces turned pale as they exposed their disgraceful state to the relatives. You too! What have you done? Lynn's parents were probably the most shocked. Their daughter was intimate with her father-in-law, Tom, at her husband's funeral. It was no wonder they couldn't believe their eyes. No, it's not like that. I was just resting because I felt sick, and Tom was taking care of me. But then he attacked me. Lynn screamed in a desperate attempt to paint Tom as the villain. Tom seemed surprised by Lynn's accusation and yelled back, What are you talking about? It's true. It's unthinkable that a wife mourning her husband would do something like this herself. Lynn's words visibly shocked Tom, who felt betrayed. I couldn't stand their farce any longer and said, Excuse me, may I say something? I happened to see the two of you being intimate together earlier. My revelation made Tom and Lynn glare at me in unison. The relatives were holding their breath, waiting to see what I would say next. What nonsense are you talking about? You really are a dumb and gullible woman. Ah, and Ken was just as foolish. He must have inherited that from his mother. Tom lashed out at me and Ken. I had never been directly attacked by Tom before, but now it was clear. From the moment he met Lynn, he didn't care about me anymore. To think a man his age would be so easily seduced by a woman as young as his own daughter, it was despicable. Oh, can you still say that after seeing this? I confronted Tom boldly, showing him the video I had recorded earlier in the waiting room of him and Lynn in the midst of their affair. The video, of course, captured Tom and Lynn, who never imagined they were being secretly recorded, indulging in their desires for each other. What is this? Why did you record this? Tom and Lynn's faces turned to panic as they watched the video. The relatives present were also turning pale with shock at the unfolding events. Lynn, is this true? Why did you do this? It's not true, Mom. This is some mistake. There's no way I would love anyone other than Ken. Lynn tried desperately to explain, but doubt was spreading across her mother's face. As the video reached a particular point, everyone's faces froze. It's fine. I locked the door earlier, and everyone's at the chapel. They all think Ken died in a tragic accident, even though I did it. Oh, Tom. But because of that, we can be together now. Thank you, I love you. The video revealed Tom's confession of the hit and run and evidence of their love affair. The look of disbelief spread across everyone's faces. Even I was deeply shocked when I first heard their words. I couldn't believe that Ken lost his life because of these two. You killed Ken? Lynn's father looked at Tom as if he were a monster. This is a setup. I didn't do it. Tom shouted, but his excuses sounded utterly desperate. What about this then? I began playing a recording of Tom and Lynn's conversation at home, discussing their love for each other and planning to harm Ken. It was all there, they're planning to harm Ken. This was recorded at our home the day before Ken died. Everyone, after hearing this, do you still think these two are innocent? I asked. Everyone shook their heads. The video and the recording had a profound impact. What have you done, you old hag? Because of you, everything about us and Ken got exposed. Hey Lynn! Watch how you speak! Lynn's true colors showed as she shouted, and I sighed in dismay. Lynn, I thought you were a well-mannered, wonderful young lady. But since you started living with us, I began to suspect something. You were just acting like a decent person with common sense. In reality, you were laughing at me and Ken in your heart, weren't you? That is. Lynn's face turned bitter and she stuttered, apparently hitting the mark. She then looked at Tom as if seeking help. However, Tom, not wanting to increase his guilt, glared at Lynn and shouted. That's right. It's all her fault for seducing me. Who flirts with their father-in-law like that? Despite how many times I refused, she kept persisting, so I pretended to reciprocate her feelings just for a while. Lynn probably didn't expect Tom to shift the blame onto her. I could see her expression changing from surprise to anger. However, she too had betrayed Tom just moments ago, making them equally guilty in this situation. Hey! You're the worst! Weren't you the one who seduced me in the first place? Wasn't it you who suggested we live together and actively pursued a relationship with me? It was all you're doing, Tom. What? As Tom and Lynn began to argue vehemently, I felt a headache coming on. Was my son's life lost because of these two despicable people and their charade? I truly feel so sorry for Ken. I clenched my palms tightly. Listen. It doesn't matter who seduced who, or who is more to blame. The fact remains that you both trampled on mine and Ken's dignity and took his life. And instead of apologizing to Ken, you won't even admit your guilt. This is outrageous. Ken's life was not a tool for your affair and arguments. Apologize to Ken right now. I was surprised at the anger that surged from within me as I looked back and forth between Tom and Lynn. This anger was not just mine. It was for Ken's grief and for everyone present here. Tom and Lynn's expressions froze, turning to fear. Please forgive me. I just wanted to be with Lynn. I thought getting rid of Ken would make us happy. I'm sorry too. Tom and Lynn apologized with their hands and knees, but their actions had taken my son's life. This was not something that could be easily forgiven. You two apologizing here means nothing. Go to jail and pay for your crimes. If you understand, then get out. You have no right to be at Ken's funeral. I spat out the words, and Tom and Lynn, shrunk in fear, left the waiting room. Surely, with so many witnesses to their crime, they wouldn't think of escaping. After chasing them out, I slumped to the ground, drained of all energy. I'm so sorry for what our daughter has caused. We never meant for this to happen to Ken. Lynn's parents came to me on their hands and knees. They must be in tremendous pain too. They could never have imagined their daughter would conspire with her father-in-law to kill her husband. Please, get up. The blame is not yours alone, my husband is equally at fault. The two responsible are Tom and Lynn. You, the father and mother, are not to blame. As I said this, Lynn's parents finally looked up, tears in their eyes. No one cried aloud during Ken's funeral. Everyone just bore a heavy weight in their hearts, silently mourning his tragic fate. I hoped Tom and Lynn would truly pay for their sins. That's all I wish. Afterward, Tom and Lynn went to the police as expected to confess their crimes. Their sentence hadn't been determined yet, but considering they took a life, their punishment would be severe. Imprisonment was inevitable. I thought to myself, dully, that I wouldn't have to see their faces for a while. Even if they were released from prison, I doubted they would be together again. I had witnessed Tom and Lynn betraying each other at Ken's funeral, accusing each other of the crime. Their love had probably cooled off after that incident. Ironic, isn't it? They committed a crime to foster their love, but in the end, they wouldn't end up together. I felt even more pity for Ken. His life was used and lost without any meaning. My heart ached as I constantly thought about him. I intend to divorce Tom. I can't imagine staying married to the man who played a part in taking my son's life. I have resolved to live the rest of my life cherishing Ken's memory. Lynn, too, seems to have been disowned by her parents and will have nowhere to return to after her release. She had been a housewife since marrying Ken, but now she'll have to fend for herself. I don't know how well she'll manage on her own after committing such a grave sin, but I think she deserves to taste hardship. No matter how much she atones, Ken won't come back. Compared to the pain Ken and I endured, living alone should be trivial. I can only hope that Ken is smiling down on us from heaven. That's all I wish for now.